first book I read in January was Hate List. This book is about a school shooting. More specifically, it's about a girl named Valerie who wrote a list of people and things she hated with her boyfriend, and he then goes on to commit a school shooting. So it's more about the afterwards. It's about how she heals after what has happened, about how she comes to terms with the fact that she wrote people's names on the list and then they were shot or killed. It's also about who her boyfriend was and how she could have not suspected anything from him. And that's, I think, what I liked best about this book, is that there are people who don't expect anything from the shooter. They know him and they think he's a perfectly nice boy. He's a bit of a loner, but he has friends and he has people who care about him, and he seems fine. And a lot of people don't suspect anything. And that's sort of the truth of these sort of situations. They come out of nowhere sometimes. No one expects things to happen. No one is looking for the right signs. And Valerie is blown away. She didn't want any of the people on this list to die. She hated them in the way that teenagers hate a lot of people, but she didn't want them to actually be killed, and she's now being blamed for half of it, and they're asking, how could you not know? She just didn't know that. A lot of people just don't know. So I really thought the writing in this was really good. There was a lot of action. It was a very interesting book, and I liked the way that it examined more about the healing process post an event like this, for not just Valerie, who was sort of implicated in a school shooting, but for the victims and the people who weren't direct victims, but were victims by being there and having that trauma put into their life. So I liked that. The second book I read was actually a novella that is at the back of this book. So it's Say Anything, also by Jennifer Brown. And I hated it. I hated it. Who asked for this story? Who wanted it? So this follows a character named David, who appears for like 3 sentences in the original story and is a friend of Valerie and the school shooters. And it turns out he saw all the signs and he didn't say anything about it. And he also gets bullied a lot because people think he's gay. And that's essentially the story. What made me hate the story, though, was that David is a nice guy. He sits around and thinks, why does Valerie date Nick? Why does she like this guy who isn't very nice to her, and I would be so much nicer to her? I would be the best. I would treat her like a lady all the time. And he spends the whole book like that. And I guess, like, in the end, he's right. Nick isn't a great guy. He's a school shooter, but that doesn't mean she has to like David. Like, David is so clearly not someone that Valerie is interested in, and it's just really gross to read his perspective, where he just wants to be around her all the time and is thinking about dating her all the time, thinking about, like, if only she would see what a good guy I am, she would leave Nick and be with me. And I don't like that. I didn't like David as a character. I don't like that he saw all these things. He saw people with guns, and he was just like, that's probably fine. I'm not going to talk about that to anyone or mention it to anyone. That's cool. And he just wasn't a sympathetic character. Who asked for this story? Who asked for this novella? There are so many characters in this book I would like a point of view from, and David was not even on the list. I had forgotten David was even a character when I got to the novella, because he is so infrequently in it. All he does in the main story is walk up to Valerie and hug her the second she comes back to school, which, reading David's POV, is now creepy. Thanks. The third book I read in January was How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories. So this is the Alcrate edition. This is absolutely a 5-star read. If you haven't read the Folk of the Air trilogy, I highly recommend it. It is beautiful. It's Holly Black's best writing. I've read almost everything she's done, and I love this series so much. But this is especially such a beautiful book. Just the art in it is stunning. And I love how they use the pictures to tell stories. I loved seeing Jude and Cardan drawn. So they have, it's sort of a picture book and has stories and art. We have Nicasia and her mother here. I liked seeing more of Cardan's perspective and why he loved Jude so much. I liked seeing how things were for him, how he struggled when he was younger, and how he sort of became the prince that we know and love, and then how he moved on to be the prince that Jude ended up deciding to be with and be the queen of. So it was just a really beautiful book. I loved the art. I loved the stories. I liked the story that tied through, where the old troll woman would tell him the same story again, but twist it a little each time until Cardan tells his own version of it. And it's sort of like a mirror for how Cardan is growing throughout the stories. you start with stories where he's quite young, and then you get to sort of the present day where he is with Jude visiting the mortal world, and he's not quite the cruel prince anymore, but he's still not a sweet little boy. But he is so beautiful in this book, both in the art and just the stories, and I adored it. I hope we get to see more of this world, maybe not specifically Jude and Cardan as much as I miss them, but I do want Holly Black to write more about these characters because she has done such a beautiful job bringing them all to life. The next book I read in January was actually a manga, so it was the 11th issue of the Fullmetal version of Fullmetal Alchemist. So this is sort of a repackage they're doing in hardcover that started about 2 or 3 years ago, and they're slowly re-releasing the series. This is Kimberly on the cover here. He's one of the antagonists. So first of all, these books are gorgeous. Like, I don't know if you can see how beautiful it is on the camera, but it is definitely one of the nicest manga I've ever seen. It's very rare for manga to come out in hardback like this, for bigger series anyways, so I'm so thrilled to be able to collect them. As far as the story in this one, it's sort of a part of the story I'm not really into. All of Fullmetal Alchemist is a masterpiece. It's the best manga ever written. Highly recommend it. But as far as the story here, this is kind of one of the rare dips in the plot where I'm like, I just kind of want to get to the next exciting thing because I know it's really good, and the last thing was really good, and this is just kind of building up to the next thing. It is where Kimberly starts to become a main character. He sort of appears a couple times before, and then now he is coming in full throttle, and I think he's a really fascinating character. He's really fun to watch, and he's one of the antagonists that I actually think has a lot of potential, and I wish they would have done a little more with him instead of some of the more dull antagonists that they have. But it is beautiful. It does have some of the scenes from the war that I like seeing, from Roy's point of view, but there was just not enough Ed in this volume for me. I wish we would have seen more of Ed and his brother, because they're sort of the core of the series, and I feel like they also bring it up when it gets a little too dark, and this volume is just kind of a downer. There's not a lot of Ed and Al to bring it back up to the point where I like it to be. The next book I read in January was Legendborn, so this is amazing. Reading it, I could not believe this was a debut book. Like, this is the author's first book, and she kills it. Every part of it she kills. Her writing style is fantastic. The characters are well realized, well written. I love all of them, even the ones that are sort of not meant to be loved. They're still fascinating to read about, so I still liked reading about them. The main character is a black girl named Bree who is growing up in the South, and it sort of examines what it's like for her to grow up in a place where she knows that slavery has roots and that she's lost a lot of her ancestors and history, and she can't go back and track her family tree because of these things that have happened. It really looks at racism in a way that made me really uncomfortable, which I think is a good thing. Tracy Deonn sort of just goes for it. She shows you exactly what's happened to people like this. She shows you how it still affects people today, and how even the most well-meaning characters who are clearly meant to be on the good side of things, they are allies, they still sometimes do racist things, like reach out and touch Bree's hair without asking her because it's curly. And I thought that was really nice that they show that you can do things accidentally and it can still be wrong. And the main story is sort of about the secret King Arthur society that Bree gets entangled with, and sort of Arthur and Merlin and those tales, and how Bree is trying to sort of find a place for herself at this school where she feels like she doesn't really have a place, and she's never historically had a place here. She walks into places and knows so many years ago these were built by slaves and I wouldn't have been welcomed here, and she feels that a lot. She feels like she is unwelcome still. They just can't tell her that she's unwelcome anymore. So I really liked that. I liked that it made me uncomfortable and it made me really think about things, and I really liked the magic system, the characters, the monsters. I just adored this. I can't wait for the sequel. I think Tracy Deonn is one of the best. She's written one of the best debuts I've ever read. It is such a stunning work for someone to come out of the gate with, to be like, this is my first book, it's a masterpiece. So I can't wait to read the sequel to this. I loved it. And also, look at that cover. I got the Owl Crate variant, but both the Owl Crate variant and the original cover are just absolutely beautiful. It's just stunning. So I loved it. Definitely a 5-star read. The next book that I finished in the month of January was After the Woods. This book was not the story I thought it was going to be. So it's about a girl who is running with her friend, and her friend gets taken down by this creepy man, and her friend is about to be kidnapped. So instead of letting her friend be kidnapped, Julia steps in and lets herself be kidnapped instead. She escapes, and this book takes place sort of a year after, dealing with the trauma of her being kidnapped and her trying to find out why they were kidnapped and make sense of the event. So that could have been a really interesting story, and it just wasn't. It ended up being more about like, oh, Julia's friend. What is Julia's friend like? What's her relationship with her mother like? It was a lot about Julia's best friend and dealing with the trauma between her and her mother, because her mother is very abusive. And the story didn't go where I wanted it to go. We don't actually learn more about the killer. We don't actually learn sort of how Julia's going to overcome it. There's an awkward romance shoved in with the son of the police chief that I don't think we needed. I don't think there was a place for romance in this book, but we have it. And the worst part was that it seems like Julia's friend was kidnapped because of her relationship to this man in a video game called Prey. And they never explain what Prey is. Prey is brought up so many times in this book, and they're like, everyone knows Prey. It's the most popular video game. Everyone plays it. And it's something about Roman gods and hunting women in the forest with like fatigues and military combat gear, but the women are dressed up in like togas. That's it. They don't explain it. We don't get any scenes from the video game. The protagonist never explores the video game. She's never played it, so we don't know anything about it, but they keep bringing it up. It's like Prey. Oh, they met on Prey. They were trying to act out Prey in real life. But you don't tell us what Prey is. What's the point? Tell us what Prey is. Like, you can't build your whole story on a fake video game and then never explain the actual mechanics of the fake video game or why it matters. Anyways, I hated it. I hated that they didn't explain that to me. I spent the whole book waiting for them to explain what Prey was and why it mattered, and they don't. They don't explain it. They just do the whole book, and they're like, yep, and it was all because of Prey. 2 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was This Song Will Save Your Life, which is about a young girl who is different, and she doesn't really fit in at school. She gets bullied a lot, and she ends up going to this underground club, which she's too young to be in, by the way. She goes to an underground club, and she goes up to the DJ, and she ends up learning to DJ from him, and she finds out she loves DJing. She's a DJing prodigy, and this is her calling in life. So, I had a few problems with this book. I'm going to start with the things I liked, because I did like the club scene. I liked how they depicted DJing. It's clear that Layla Sales really studied DJing and studied the art of finding the right song to play. I liked the song she chose. I liked the way she talked about music and how it can affect people. I loved the music in this book, and sort of the setting was beautiful, and all of that was very good. I didn't like the story. So this 16-year-old girl goes into an underground club. She's too young to be there, and she learns to DJ from a 20-year-old man. There's a very awkward romantic encounter between her and the 20-year-old man that continues for almost the whole book. Like, she is going to this 20-year-old man's house, and they're together, and they're in a relationship, and that's never resolved. Her parents never find out about it, and spoilers, I don't think anyone's going to read this, but spoilers, the only karma that he has is that he's not actually a full-time DJ, he also works in a pizza store. So that makes his life suck, I guess. Like, fuck you if you work in a pizza restaurant, your life sucks, and that's enough punishment for a man who literally molested a child, because he works in a pizza store, so his life is shitty, because he doesn't work as a DJ full-time. The other problem I had with this book was she gets hired as a DJ at the club. There's no way you would not face legal repercussions for that. This is a club with alcohol in it. She is 16. She is 16, and this man who runs this club looks at her and he's like, do you want to be my DJ? I'll hire you as my DJ. You cannot do that. There are laws against this sort of thing. You can't hire a 16-year-old to work midnight to 3 a.m. at your club full of drunk people. And her parents find out about this. And they're like, well, we support your dream, honey. We're gonna let you DJ at this club full of drunk people at midnight to 3 a.m. That's fine. Her parents are really, really shitty, which is the other thing that bothered me. At one point, she has a fight with her mom This is a girl who people think have tried to kill herself, by the way. They think she's tried to commit suicide. So she is acting out, and she has a fight with her mom where she ruined something of her sister's, and that's obviously bad. You know, she ruined something for her sister that was really meaningful. But instead of being like, maybe I should get my daughter therapy, because I've never gotten her, like, significant therapy, even though she's tried to kill herself, and she's a loner and has no friends. Instead, her mom's like, you're not welcome in our home anymore. You're gonna go live with your father, and we don't want you here anymore. So that's a great way to parent your potentially suicidal child who has no friends and no significant life outside of your home that you know of, and you're just going to tell her that she's going to go live with her dad because she ruined something for her new step-sibling, and now it looks like you love her step-sibling more than her. So maybe don't do that. Anyways, I didn't like it. I felt like it had a lot of potential. If they would have made the characters adults, it would have had a lot of potential, but it just ended up being weird, and there's a lot of gross stuff with the poor teenage girl who's being manipulated by this 20-year-old DJ. And also, she's not like other girls. She hates all the other girls. They're so different from her. Even at the end of the book, where you think she would have realized, everyone, like, sort of has a passion, she's like, I don't think it's possible for anyone interesting to be popular in high school. So, 2 out of 5 stars. I didn't like that. I didn't like almost any of it, but the music was enough to make it not a 1 star. The music was really interesting, and I liked the research that went into writing a DJ. Okay. The next book I read this month was another book about a school shooter. This is Shooter by Caroline Pignat. So this is actually an author who is Canadian, who lives sort of near me, so I really wanted to love it, and I just sort of didn't. I thought there was a lot of good potential in this book, but it led with The Breakfast Club mixed with We Need to Talk About Kevin. And if you swing at the king, you best not miss, and it did. It missed. The characters are sort of flat. They're all, this is the jock, this is the loner, this is the pretty girl, this is the weird girl. And they all have, like, one secret, just one secret in their entire life, and it's one massive secret. And that's their character. They are the jock with one big secret, the loner with one big secret. So they're pretty flat. There is autism representation in this book, but I don't know if it's good or not, so I don't want to talk about that. It's there. Is it good? I don't know. But there is an autistic character who's with them during the shooting, and he's the weird girl's brother. There's sort of a burden narrative there where she feels burdened to have to take care of him. I don't think that's a very popular view, so I don't know that that was good. Ultimately, this book is just sort of about these 4 kids who are locked down during a school shooting, hearing shots and bombs ringing out, and they're like, well, I didn't get into my university of choice. Bitch, you might not make it to university. You might be dead. Is this the time to speak about this? They're literally just sitting in the bathroom, listening to potentially people dying outside the bathroom. They're like, my boyfriend cheated on me. Like, okay. He cheated on you. He might be dead in the next 20 minutes. Who cares? Deal with these problems outside of this situation. The Breakfast Club worked because they were in an all-day detention. That's 8 hours where you can just talk about your life, and there's no consequences because there's no bigger thing happening. You're just stuck in a Saturday detention. This is a school shooting. People could be dying. They don't know, and they're in the bathroom for 1 hour, and they just, let's talk about our lives and the sad things that have happened to us. Like, there's almost no sense of urgency for a lot of this story. They're just sitting, telling the stories of their lives, talking about how people don't understand them and how hard it is being them. And that's it. Like, it's just them sitting in the bathroom talking about it, and it's so frustrating because there's something bigger going on at the moment. They should be focused on what's happening. The other big problem I had with this book is that it's a school shooting story where the main characters become heroes and stop the school shooting and save everyone. And I don't like that narrative. I don't think it's good. If you're in a school shooting, you should save yourself. You should protect yourself, and you should not swing. The scene is so ridiculous. So essentially the main characters go, and it's like a superhero stopping of the school shooting where they swing from the ceiling and they do all these impossible feats to stop the guy from shooting up the school. Instead of just, like, convincing the police to get on their side. The police are essentially portrayed as these, like, bumbling buffoons who don't know enough about teenagers to deal with the school shooting and don't understand what's happening. And I thought that was not a good look. The police are there to help you in this situation, and you should trust them as best you can. You definitely shouldn't climb into the ceiling and swing from the rafters to try and disarm a bomb yourself, because you are a 16-year-old child, and that is not your job. It is not your job to save everyone and do dangerous things like that. So I don't know, I thought it was silly that they spent the whole story talking about bullshit in the bathroom while people were dying, and I didn't like that a romance developed between two of the characters within an hour. An hour is not a long time. Like, it's barely time to get to know someone, even in a situation like this. So 2 to 5 stars. I wish I would have liked it more, because I don't read a lot of Canadian authors, and I wanted so badly to love the few Canadian authors I do read, but I just didn't. I'm sorry. The final book I read in January was The Lives of Saints by Leigh Bardugo, so I'm obviously a huge Bardugo fan, and this book was just stunning. So the art is absolutely beautiful. The depictions of the saints feel like they're from real religious texts in a lot of cases. Like, they look exactly the way certain paintings from, like, the Bible would look. So I really adored that. I adored the stories from different parts of the world about all the different saints that we get to see. And I just thought it was really good. The stories are pretty short. They're not long, big stories. They're about, like, a page or two each. This is my favorite one. Look at all those roses. So we do get to see the saints that we see in King of Scars. We get to read their stories. We get to read about Alina, obviously. We get to read about saints that we saw in the original series. And I thought it was a really good idea. I'm surprised it took them so long to write a book about the saints, because this is the book that Alina is searching for, the whole first series. It's a book that has immense value in the entire Grisha-verse. And they wrote A Language of Thorns, and I loved A Language of Thorns. I just thought it was weird that they didn't write this first. Like, I felt like this was a bigger deal, so I'm so happy that it came out before the Netflix series, because it is a fantastic companion novel. I don't think it stands on its own the way that Language of Thorns can, but if you've read the rest of the Grisha-verse, this is a fantastic companion novel, maybe one of the best companion novels I've ever read, and I thought it was absolutely beautiful. I only gave it 4 stars because it's obviously not meant to be read on its own. There's no real overarching plot, there's no real characters, it's just a collection of saint stories, but it's just a beautiful book also. Look at the cover. The cover is textured, and the art inside is worthwhile. Even if you're not going to read it front to back, it's nice to just have it on your shelf and to refer to it when they talk about certain saints and be like, oh, I wonder what the story of that saint is. It's in here. So I loved it. I loved it a lot. It's going to definitely stay on my shelf and have a place of pride like everything from the Grisha-verse does. And I just thought it was a good book. I thought it was a really good book, and I wish they would have written it sooner, because I would have loved to read this alongside when I read the original Grisha trilogy. So those are all 9 of the stories that I read in January. I'm hoping to get to read at least 5 books in February. That's my tentative goal. 5. I don't think I'll read 9 in February. February just feels so short. But I'm hoping to read 5. That's my goal. Alright, tell me what you read in January, what your favorite book that you read was. Maybe I'll add it to my TBR to read eventually. And you guys have a lovely day.